Hi, this is Northern Kentucky History Hour with Behringer-Crawford Museum. Thank you so much for joining us. We are happy to have you with us. We're going to be letting our friends in the Zoom meeting in here in just a bit, and then we will be getting started with episode 41 of Northern Kentucky History Hour. Good evening and welcome to Northern Kentucky History Hour. We're so glad to have you with us. If you're joining on Zoom or joining on Facebook, we're glad to see you tonight. We are going to be spending just a couple minutes letting everyone into our meeting for those in Zoom, and then we will be getting started. All right. Again, if you're just now joining us, this is Behringer-Crawford Museum's Northern Kentucky History Hour. My name is Tara Johnson-Noem. I'm one of the trustees for the museum. So glad to have all of you with us tonight. Looks like we've got quite a few in already. So I will go ahead and remind everyone, even though if you're on Zoom, you are muted, we really want you to participate. And so we hope that you will add your comments and your questions into the chat. I will remind you that depending on the kind of device that you have, you might be able to be seen if your video is on, even if you cannot see others. So sometimes if you're like on a desktop, you can still see everybody, but maybe if you're on an iPad, you can't. And so just want to let you know, we love to see your smiling face, but if you want to turn off your video, feel free to do that as well. So see so many friendly faces in the audience tonight, a number of museum members, as well as Behringer-Crawford trustees and staff. Thank you for joining us. And we will go ahead and get started with our thank yous. So I want to say thank you to the museum staff for all they do to make this program possible. Thank you to our members for your support. If you are not already a member of Behringer-Crawford Museum, we would love to count you among our members, and you can go to bcmuseum.org to find out how to join. And let's see, we also want to thank the financial supporters of the museum. Behringer-Crawford Museum is supported by the Kenton County Fiscal Court, the City of Covington, Arts Wave, the Kentucky Arts Council, Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, the Carol Ann and Ralph V. Hale Jr. U.S. Bank Foundation, and again, our members. So I'm going to just jump right in tonight because we have so many stories to share with you. Our guest is John Middleton. He is the first Republican elected to the office of Kenton County Circuit Clerk. He is a graduate of Salmon P. Chase College of Law, and he served as managing partner of Middleton and Middleton PLLC from 1999 to 2007. He is, as I'm sure he will tell you himself, the son of Mary and Clyde Middleton, and we are looking forward to hearing his story of their lives, which really are so much the story of the history of Northern Kentucky. So, John, so glad to see you and welcome.
Tara, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on tonight. It's really a privilege and an honor to be able to present tonight on the lives and times of my hero and heroine, Clyde and Mary Middleton. This is made possible really because of Mary and Clyde, and mostly Mary, who literally kept everything from their years of public service and everything that they had done throughout their lives. So a lot of these things are available and are really in my basement right now. But I am very pleased to announce that we're also going to be donating. Behringer-Crawford Museum is going to be accepting a lot of the items. So you may see those in exhibits over the years at Behringer-Crawford, and the Kenton County Library will be accepting the paper documents. So there are a lot of, that'll be there in a Middleton family file at the library. So it'll be there for posterity. So I'm very pleased to be able to do that. And there is so much to talk about tonight. And so without further ado, I'm going to get started with the presentation. So let's see here. maybe. There we go. Okay, so Mary Middleton was born May 18th, 1928 in Wausau, Wisconsin. Her father had started a bookstore in downtown Wausau upon his return from World War I. That bookstore is still in existence today and recently celebrated its 100th anniversary. And it's currently owned by Mary's niece and my cousins, Jane Yonke Johnson and nephew Jim Yonke. So very pleased that they're still operating that bookstore in downtown Wausau. Mary graduated from St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota. This first slide is her tuition, one of her tuition receipts, and it looks like it's for room and board, $168. Wouldn't we love to have that in today's time? But pretty interesting there. Clyde Middleton was born on January 30th, 1928 in Cleveland, Ohio. He attended Euclid Shores High School and then attended the Case College in Cleveland. It was there that he was approached by his academic advisor. Clyde had a number of great attributes. One was he was a great test taker. One of his downfalls was that he was not all that great with the practical application of things. And so his classes were not going so well at Case. In fact, his academic advisor advised him that his relationship with the university was in jeopardy of being severed. And so Clyde decided that rather than continue on with Case, that he was going to enlist in the United States Navy. So he enlisted in the Navy, was attending boot camp at Great Shores National or Naval Station, Air Station in Chicago. And at that point, he had also continued to apply for the United States Naval Academy. And fortunately for him, his congressman gave him an appointment based on his test scores. And so he received an appointment to the United States Naval Academy. And this is one of the themes of Clyde's life, I think, is that, he has setbacks and then he moves forward. And so he graduated from, the Naval Academy, one of the most prestigious universities, in a class of 51. Their class motto is 51, second to none. In the meantime, Mary was working for the YWCA at camps in South Dakota and was on a trip to Europe and had sent a letter to the national office of the Y asking if there were any openings anywhere else. And they indicated that there were two openings that they had. There was one in Hollywood, California, and another in Honolulu, Hawaii. And Mary always said that she turned down Hollywood to go to Hawaii. So this is the telegram indicating that that opening was there in Hawaii. At that time then, about that same time, Clyde was stationed at Pearl Harbor in Honolulu. And here he is on the beach in Waikiki during his service at Pearl Harbor. It was at that time that Mary joined a group called the Malahini Maidens. And that group was a group of ladies who put on dances for service members. And at one of those dances, she met this strikingly handsome naval officer pictured here in this photo, Clyde Middleton. And, it was kind of love at first sight. And so they fell in love and in Hawaii. What a better place to be in love. Of course, Clyde had orders then shortly after they had met to ship out to San Diego, but he didn't want to leave Mary. So he waited and waited and actually let those orders expire, and then got an additional order to go to Japan. And his superiors at the time said that if he didn't take this order, he was going to be court-martialed. So he figured he better go ahead and move on to his next order to Japan. So what is a young lady in love to do in this time? Well, she decided she was going to follow him around the world. And so Mary and her two girlfriends decided that they were going to take a trip around the world. And they were going to ship out. And this is the manifesto from the ship that they had. which is called the SS Japan Transport. So remember, this is in 1950s, shortly after World War II ends. 3 ladies are leaving to go to Japan on this ship. The only other 2 women on the ship were the captain's wife and a missionary couple. So you can see that Mary was quite the adventurer. And so they went over and met Clyde in Japan, and then went on to the Philippines and Hong Kong. I think they came back and saw Clyde again in Japan, and then made their way through Egypt in the Suez Canal. There are a number of stories there, and I don't have time for all the stories. Maybe I'll have to wait to tell the Suez Canal story at some point. But she got to France and proceeded to run out of money. I think she had maybe $300 to get as far as she had gotten, and I had to ask her father to wire her money. And this is the Western Union receipt where he wired her $225 to get back to the States. At that point, Clyde decided that he couldn't live without Mary, and went to Wausau and proposed marriage to her in Wausau. And at the time, Mary's father, Carl, was operating the bookstore, and the bookstore also somehow ordered jewelry. And so Clyde ordered the wedding ring through his future father-in-law, and the father-in-law supposedly put on the order, please put a rush on this before the groom changes his mind. So another great story about that. They were married on August 15th. And this is the Wausau Herald newspaper from Wausau, with all the information regarding her wedding and what people were wearing, and that it's kind of the interesting times to see this newspaper. But she kept the newspaper article from that time, so that was very nice to have. Shortly after they got married, Clyde's first station was in Norfolk, Virginia, and he was stationed there in the Navy. And Mary got a job as in a secretarial pool at a local facility, and they had an apartment there. And Mary had to ride the bus to work. And on that bus, this was Virginia in the 1950s. So if you can imagine what was going on in Virginia in the 1950s in busing, well, it was segregated. And so the blacks had the ride in the back of the bus, and Mary proceeded to get up and walk to the back of the bus and ride in the back of the bus, because she, quote, thought it was stupid that we had to segregate the races. And just shows Mary's spunk and how far ahead of the times she really was in the things that she did. Clyde got out of the Navy then, and did his 4 years of service, and moved to Chicago, because he had gotten a job with the Procter & Gamble company. You might recognize that name, and that's going to play into the story here shortly. But in Chicago, they had the first of their 4 children, and this is a picture of my sister Anne Eleanor. And this is really kind of their first Christmas card that they sent out. And Mary became very famous for her Christmas cards, because she had done a picture card for every year thereafter. And she continued to meet people and add them to her Christmas card list. At one time, when she was local here, she had 300 people on her Christmas card list. And then probably another couple hundred outside of the area, that she said the out-of-town people. And for the longest while, she would hand address each of those cards. And then I eventually convinced her to put it on the computer and let me do labels for her. But then she would at least write a personal note on each card. So she was quite the Christmas card writer. But this is the first card with Anne. They would go on to have 3 additional children, all born in Kentucky. David Edward, Richard Carl, and yours truly, John Clyde. Each child would then have 2 children, and so they would have a total of 8 grandchildren, which they currently have. So they were very proud of their children and grandchildren. In the meantime, Clyde's job at Procter & Gamble wasn't going so well. He blamed it on a crusty old World War II veteran that was his boss there at Procter & Gamble, and said that he just didn't like him. And so Clyde was asked to transfer to a different area, and that was in purchasing. And they transferred him to Cincinnati, Ohio. And so the story goes that they came. I think the story that they'd like to be told was they came and they saw how beautiful and green Kentucky was and decided to move there. In reality, I think that my mother looked at the cost of housing in Cincinnati and the cost of housing in northern Kentucky and decided that it was far cheaper to live in northern Kentucky. So they actually purchased or rented a house in Edgewood for a few years, and then found their dream home on Fort Mitchell Avenue, where they lived, both of them, essentially the remainder of their entire lives on Fort Mitchell Avenue. So Clyde became involved in Procter & Gamble, was in the lunchroom talking about politics, became very active in that talk about politics, and decided that he wanted to become involved. And so he went to the chairman of the Kenton County Republican Party at the time, a guy named Ed Freshney, and asked Ed, told Ed he wanted to be involved, and Ed said, "Great, I'm going to put you on the executive committee. We don't have enough people on the executive committee." So even before he even did that, he said, "Well, wait a minute here. I guess I better go register to vote." So he wasn't even registered to vote yet. And Ed Freshney had asked him to be on the Republican executive committee. And part of that was because there weren't any Republicans in Kenton County. There just weren't that many people that wanted to be involved, especially young people. And so Ed Freshney was very foresightful in getting young people involved in the Republican Party. So Clyde got involved in the Republican Party, was on the executive committee, still working for Procter & Gamble, and is on a business trip to Louisiana. And he's out late one night, probably drinking and smoking, like they did at that time in the business world. Comes back to the hotel and stops at the front desk, and the front desk says, "We've got a message from your wife to call home no matter the hour." So Clyde is freaking out. He is like, "Oh my goodness, I've got a young wife and 2 young children at home. What is going on? Why does she want me to call?" Well, Mary wanted to call because she wanted to tell Clyde that she had filed for state representative. And so Mary had filed to become a Republican candidate for state representative in 1959. And she wanted him to know before he found out when he got home. So you can imagine the situation there with Mary having been a young person from out of town, not a native in Northern Kentucky. Northern Kentucky was a very close community at that time. And also a female, and also a Republican of all things. That was quite an interesting race. She announced in her campaign announcement, she said, "Since many of the men folk cannot make the necessary sacrifices to seek public office unless they are professional politicians, and I believe it's those professionals who've given politics a bad name, it's up to women." And she was so obviously ahead of her time. And she would say, in the announcement, "Perhaps my entry will break the longstanding traditions and encourage other women to seek office in the future." Of course, that was not to be for some time, but she was really a groundbreaking person at that time. And so one of the themes of my presentation is going to be how tied together in Northern Kentucky we are. Who was her opponent in that race for state representative? Here's the ballot from that year. It was also governor's year. Burt Combs ran against a guy named John Robinson, who I'd never heard of. But if you look down at the state representative for the 58th district, it was Charlie Summey. And you will recognize that Summey name because it is very prominent in Northern Kentucky. In fact, Charlie would later serve with Clyde Middleton on the Kenton County Fiscal Court. So how do you like that? With all those odds being stacked against her, it was not to be, she would lose that race overwhelmingly, but she really made an impression on people. She made an impression on the chairman of the Republican Party, that Ed Freshney, who I mentioned. He wrote her this letter saying the best man lost, or in this case, the best woman lost, and invited her to be on the Republican Executive Committee. And at the same time, she was also working with women to get a women's group together. And she was one of the founding members and the first president of the Kenton County Republican Women's Club. That women's club is still in existence today and is one of the stronger clubs in the whole Commonwealth of Kentucky. And Mary Middleton was the first president of that. One of the events that she held during her campaign was an event with Lorraine Cooper, who was the wife of then very popular United States Senator John Sherman Cooper. Just saw a KET event on John Sherman Cooper a few months back, and then started finding all this information about John Sherman Cooper and Lorraine Cooper coming in. And you can see in the article that Mary held this event at the Fort Mitchell Country Club, and there were over 200 women in attendance for this event. So that was quite an event, and Mrs. Cooper recognized her ability to organize events. You can see that she says she's a wonderful organizer, and that she was. So Clyde was involved then as well, and he got involved with a group called the Committee of 500. Once again, this is a tie-in to one of our previous presentations. Peter Bronson did a great presentation on Beverly Hills, and as part of that, he talked about the gambling aspect of that. And there was a group that was formed at the time in Newport called the Committee of 500, and that group was working to fight the gambling and corruption in Newport. And I had no clue about this, but this is a picture on the right-hand side is a picture with Clyde Middleton there, and he was testifying before a grand jury that was put together to talk about some of the corruption that was going on. So little did I know that my father testified against the mob, essentially, and it's pretty interesting. In that same picture, on the second man from the left on there is a guy named Jack Steinman. And Jack is still alive today. He lives in Fort Thomas. He was a longtime friend, became a longtime friend of Clyde and longtime supporter. Jack ran a very successful business in Cincinnati called Deluxe Engraving. And these lifelong friends would be one of the reasons why Clyde was so politically successful. One of Clyde's kind of mentors was Richard Nixon. Nixon in 1960 was running for president of the United States against John F. Kennedy. And this is a letter to Clyde from then Vice President Richard Nixon, talking about the highlights of the 1960 campaign in here. And so we have this signed letter from Richard Nixon. Mary and Clyde were big fans of Nixon. I wish I had more opportunity to talk to him. I didn't realize that, how involved they were with Nixon's, to talk to them about what they thought about Watergate after the fact. But interesting that they were involved with Nixon. Here's a picture of Mary and Clyde with Richard, and Mary with one of her hats. She was kind of known for her hats that she would wear from time to time. And then here's a picture of Pat Nixon at the Kentucky Derby, where Clyde and Mary helped to host her at the Kentucky Derby. We actually have that calling card that's at the bottom where it says Mrs. Nixon, and below Patricia Nixon is written out. We believe that's actually Pat Nixon's handwriting. So another kind of cool thing there. Another piece of memorabilia that will be at the Behringer-Crawford Museum. Mary then wrote a letter, and I think this is a really neat letter. It's a kind of a historically significant letter. Of course, Richard Nixon went on to run against Kennedy and lose that race. Mary wrote a letter, and I see I had the draft of that letter somewhere, and I can't find it now, but her notes of this letter that she wrote I'm going to put it with this letter that she received back from Richard Nixon. This was in an envelope that had Richard Nixon on the outside in his California address. And then of course he signed the letter. But basically it's words to the effect of "I'll be back," which is really prophetic and historically nationally significant, because indeed he would come back and become elected president of the United States. So Clyde decided after Mary had run that he really wanted to be involved in things too, and decided he was going to run for United States Congress. He wasn't just going to go for the small stuff. He was going to run for United States Congress. So this is one of his flyers from his first campaign in 1960, that he was running for Congress. Clyde was a pretty inexperienced politician, and actually lost that first race in a Republican primary to a perennial Republican candidate the guy by the name of Jewel Apple. And there was one of his supporters in Lewis County, which is a heavy Republican county to the east of here, had called him and said he ended up losing by a couple hundred votes. And the supporter in Lewis County said, "Clyde, if I would have known you needed a couple hundred votes, I could have gotten those in a few hours here." But he would never take another election for granted, and would continue to work hard in future years on all his elections. Not to be deterred, he determined he'd run again in 1962. And so he ran for that same race. And, these are some of the cards in here. He emphasized his military background, his business background, his involvement in the community, including the JCs, which is a great organization, the YMCA, Cancer Crusade, and being an active member of his church and having 3 small children. You notice there's no John on there because John wasn't around yet. This is before my time. You also note some names on there at the bottom. Is J.W. Steinman, which is Jack Steinman, was his treasurer. We talked about him just a few minutes ago. And A.L. Schmidt, who is Art Schmidt, was chairman of the campaign. And Art became a state representative and then a state senator from Campbell County. So continue to have a lot of different things there. Also emphasized his endorsement by the 2 Republican U.S. senators. There were 2 Republicans, John Sherman Cooper and Thurston Morton. I have a hard time pronouncing his first name, but Thurston Morton, that's an unusual first name. Clyde ran in this district, and you can see sideways there the map. This district was like a snake, and it ran down outside of Jefferson County, south of Jefferson, almost close to the Tennessee border down there, all the way down to what's Greene County. And so it was quite a district to run in. And this was before a lot of the interstate highways and such. And so it was quite a district to travel. Clyde ran a very competitive race in 1962. He got 47.1% of the vote to 52.9% for the Democrat incumbent, who was a guy named Frank Chelf, and ran a very competitive race. Of course, he lost that race, the second congressional race he ran, and he was determined that he was going to win because he was just going to continue to outwork his opponent in that. And he decided he was going to run again. So in 1964, he said he was going to run again for Congress. Third time he's running for Congress, he goes to his bosses at Procter & Gamble, said he was going to run, and they said, "That's great, except you're not going to have a job here if you run." And he said, "Well, I'm going to win because 1964 is going to be a great year for Republicans," right? What happened in 1964? That was a horrible year for Republicans. Barry Goldwater was at the top of the ticket and ended up getting slaughtered across the country and getting beat pretty soundly in Kentucky, including the 4th Congressional District. And Clyde only won 38% of the vote. His third time he ran for Congress in 64, but he ran several thousand votes ahead of Barry Goldwater at the time. So he also, during that campaign, was able to befriend Nelson Rockefeller, who was also mentioned as a possible presidential campaign. And Dad told me just a few years before he passed that Nelson Rockefeller had flown in and flew him on his private plane down to an event. I believe he said in Somerset, but it was somewhere south in the southern part of the state. So Clyde was, had these national contacts at that time. So one of the best attributes, I talked about his failure at college and getting them involved in the Naval Academy, admitted or graduated from the Naval Academy. I talked about his failure at Procter & Gamble and then moving on and being successful at his job in purchasing. He was a 3-time failure as a candidate, which a lot of times would put you out. Clyde was not to be deterred. He decided he was going to run a smaller race this time and ran in an open seat for the state Senate. And there's a very young Clyde Middleton in his first Senate campaign. His colors at the time were these kind of fluorescent red and dark blue. And you notice some names on there. Richard T. Combs, Dick Combs would later become the first Republican county commissioner in a long time. And then Paul Tyson is on there. Paul was his treasurer. Paul later became a law partner with him later in life. Clyde faced that adversity head on and ended up winning. This was the first time that a Republican had been elected to that seat in many years. This is perhaps the most important slide in the entire presentation. And it is the most important because this presentation wouldn't be happening right now if it wasn't for that little baby that's there. And that is because that baby is yours truly. That's John Clyde. And there's a great story that goes along with this. This was in the Kentucky Post the day after I was born, May 1st. And so it was born April 30th. It was in the Kentucky Post May 1st. Dad's campaign was running for re-election in that year, 1969. For re-election to the Senate, and his campaign manager was a guy named Bernie Robinson. Bernie went on to become a very successful lobbyist, national lobbyist, and is still a very successful national lobbyist in Washington, D.C. But Bernie was the brother of a famed Northern Kentucky attorney, Bill Robinson. But Bernie was the campaign manager, and he made arrangements with the Kentucky Post that when Mary gave birth, that they were going to run into the room and get this picture with this cute baby, and that it was going to be a big campaign thing and they could use it for the campaign. And indeed, he had the Kentucky Post photographer on call. They got in there the very next day, much to my mother's chagrin, who was none too happy about having somebody in her hospital room the day after she gave birth. And Bernie Robinson was quoted as saying, "Get that kid to smile, a smile's worth 1,000 votes." One of the great stories of that. About that time, Gene Snyder was coming on the scene. Many of you may recognize Gene's name. Gene had actually won a congressional seat for the 3rd Congressional District, which was based in Louisville, and then lost in the slaughter of 64, and then came back and ran in the 4th Congressional District. I don't know why he ran in the 4th. I don't know whether he moved or was redistricted into the 4th, but ended up getting elected. Apparently, Clyde sent an emissary to him to try to get him to support him in his reelection bid in 1969. And this is a letter that Clyde received from Gene. And Gene was kind of terse with him because Gene indicated that Clyde had supported another in his primary race when he ran the first time for the 4th Congressional District. And so he was not inclined to support Clyde in that race because I guess Clyde was running against a Tom Brown in a primary, and Tom had supported Gene. But one of the enduring factors of Clyde is he really didn't hold grudges about things, and became a supporter of Gene Snyder, so much so that in years later, in this letter of 1982, Gene wrote a very nice note saying that it couldn't be possible without Clyde's hard work that he would have gotten reelected. So that at that time the 4th District was still very Democratic, but we continued to elect Republicans to the office then. This is one of the campaign brochures from Clyde's reelections. Clyde was elected in 67, as I mentioned, served until 1986, was reelected a number of times. Some of the interesting things that are on there are his support of education, and talked about support of Thomas More College, which we'll hear a little bit about Thomas More later. We had a presentation by Dave Schroeder from the library on Thomas More on this very same history hour a few months back. He was a supporter of that, and talked about tax cutting, why would he talk about tax cutting, not just because he was a Republican? Well, part of the reason was because shortly after he got elected, the first Republican in many years got elected as governor, Louis Nunn. And Louis Nunn was governor, and when he became elected, he inherited a budget that was in shambles, and they just didn't have any money. The state was flat broke. And so Louis had to go in and raise taxes and instituted the first sales tax, which was later dubbed the Nunn nickel because it was 5% at the time. Clyde voted for that tax because Nunn needed his vote to get it passed. And so Clyde needed to make sure that he was shored up with others that had been, raising taxes are never a great thing. So interesting also to see some the things on the brochures, such as the driver's license renewal notice. That's something that's near and dear to my heart because as circuit clerk, we do driver's licensing. And up until a couple of years ago, they sent out renewal notices. Well, I guess before that time they hadn't, but apparently Clyde helped spearhead that effort to get those renewal notices sent out. By the way, they stopped sending those notices out, so check your driver's license to make sure that it's not expired. But that's one of the things that were there. And you can see that his district included a few precincts in Campbell County and then the entire county of Boone County. So Clyde represented all of Boone County in the Senate the entire time that he was there. And then a number of precincts in Kenton County. And Tara, you will notice on there that he represented Sanford Town. If you recall, we had that discussion a few episodes back in the History Hour. How does this all tie together, right? About Sanford Town, and that is on there. So I found that interesting as well. Also, on some of the things they talked about, the bridge, talked about his support of the Clay Wade Bailey Bridge, and that is on there. And of course, that's something that's up and coming now. And of course, one of Clyde's biggest things that he did was the Northern Kentucky University. And so he was very instrumental in helping get Northern Kentucky University founded. At the time, it was part of the state college system run by the University of Kentucky. And he helped sponsor the bill that made Northern Kentucky University a separate university outside of the University of Kentucky's realm. So he was very proud of his efforts there. Clyde was active in the statewide Republican Party, and then in 1975, he was actually asked to serve as chairman of the Kentucky Republican Party. So I don't believe there's been another Northern Kentuckian that's held that position. And so the Republican Party, and so Clyde was the chairman of the Kentucky, the whole state Republican Party. So that's another one of his many accomplishments. Also became friends with the candidate for governor at the time, whose name was Bob Gable, and Bob became another one of those lifelong friends and supporters who continue to support him in all his efforts. Bob ran a very successful coal company and had done a bunch of different things. He ran, he was running there. And then you also note on the that one of the people that was running on that same ticket with Bob Gable was Richard Combs. That's Dick Combs that we talked about before. He was running as a candidate for state auditor. Of course, Dick Combs would become one of the first Republicans elected to the Kenton County Fiscal Court. It was still a very difficult time to be a Republican in Kentucky. When Clyde was in the Senate there were 8 Republicans. That is completely flipped now. I think there are 8 Democrats now to 30 Republicans. And I will tell you, it is much more pleasant experience to be in the majority party than it is in the minority party when you're trying to legislate. Clyde, as state party chairman, actually met with Gerald Ford at the White House. I was going through some things and Googling some things and found a official White House transcript where it said they were meeting with this guy named Clyde Middleton, who was chairman of the Kentucky Republican Party. And of course, Ford was an unelected president, right? Because he became vice president when Spiro Agnew resigned and then became president when Gerald Ford when Nixon resigned, and Ford was running for re-election in 1976, but he was being challenged and had a very strong challenge from Ronald Reagan that year. And they were going to the Republican National Convention in Kansas City, Missouri, and the convention wasn't decided. And that's probably, I think, the last time that there's been a convention that really was still up in the air before it was entering into the convention time. And so Clyde was a delegate for Gerald Ford during that convention. And this is shortly after this convention, this was Gerald Ford thanking one of his supporters for that. So he's got a letter from Richard Nixon, a letter from Gerald Ford, kind of cool thing. But Clyde, Clyde received the national appreciation from him on that. So as I mentioned, Clyde was one of the early proponents of Northern Kentucky University, but he was also one of the people that was very instrumental in Chase College of Law. Clyde started going to Chase at the time. It was affiliated with the YMCA in Cincinnati, and there were a number of colleges across the country that were actually YMCA colleges or law schools. But at that time, they started saying, you need to be affiliated with an academic institution. So Chase was looking for some place to go, and supposedly they approached Xavier University, who turned them down. And Clyde said, "I've got just the group for you. How about Northern Kentucky University, this fledgling university in Northern Kentucky?" And so he helped to sponsor the bill in the Senate to bring Chase to Northern, and then was an active supporter of Chase. And at the time, then the State Council on Higher Education did a survey, and they were trying to determine funding situation, and they said, well, maybe we ought to close one of the law schools. And of course, when they start talking about closing law schools, they're not going to close the University of Kentucky, right? They're not going to close the University of Louisville. They were talking about Chase, and everybody knew it. Clyde Middleton came to Chase's defense, and this is the newspaper article from that speech. Clyde would later say that this was the greatest speech he ever gave, and received a standing ovation for his speech to the Council on Higher Education on behalf of Chase. Because of that, and obviously the work of others, they decided to keep the law school open, and it continues to thrive and pump out graduates such as David Middleton, the class of 1984, and John Middleton, the class of 1994. So we had always joked with Mom, she was going to be the class of 2004, and she said, no way. She said, law school is too boring, and maybe she was right about that. But there was a statute that was passed that allowed libraries to be started and to be funded through a tax. But in order to get that tax passed, there had to be a petition, and the voters had to, enough voters had to sign the petition for the question to be put on the ballot. They wanted a Republican and a Democrat to be on there, and Clyde ended up being the Republican on the petition drive, and he and Mary worked very hard on that petition drive to get the library tax on the ballot. That tax passed, and the rest, as they say, is history, because now we have not only one of the best libraries in the state of Kentucky, but recently recognized as one of the best libraries in the whole country, 5-star library. So Clyde was very proud of his efforts on behalf of the Kenton County Library. Once again, those connections that are out there, how is this all connected? Who is director of the Kenton County Library now but Dave Schroeder, who gave gave a number of presentations already before the History Hour. And who was Dave's dad? Dave's dad was Ed Schroeder, and Ed was the former sheriff of Kenton County, but also the Kenton Circuit Clerk. So would have been my predecessor in office. So how does this all fit together? It's the 1 degree of separation in Northern Kentucky, right? Clyde would serve in the Senate from 1967 to 1986. 1986, this is his campaign brochure. This is the color that he started using later after his first couple of races. This color in our house would be called Middleton blue.
We would be known as Middleton Blue from that point forward. He ran against a very unpopular person from Boone County in the 1986 race named John Weaver. As I mentioned, the district was all of Boone and part of Kenton. So it became a Boone versus Kenton race, not only a Republican versus Democrat race. And despite the fact that Clyde had won 5 previous times in that race, he ended up losing Boone County, winning Kenton County, and he lost the race by 212 votes to John Weaver. Very heartbroken that the people would turn him down. But one of the things about Clyde and Mary, they were so gracious. They were so gracious in victory, and they were so gracious in, this is part of the brochure there, but they were also gracious in defeat. This was a handwritten letter that Mom wrote to her supporters that we all did our best and almost made it. Can be proud of the high level positive campaign and the 100% volunteer effort put forth. In our book, you are all winners. In the spirit of Thanksgiving, we're most appreciative of friends like you. You can be gracious in defeat. And I think that's one of the great things that they had that epitomize them. And then she said, we intend to continue to work to build a strong 2-party system in Northern Kentucky. They continue to have these national contacts. You may recognize this guy. He's a little older now, and I think he has some gray hairs, but he was in Northern Kentucky today. That's our senior United States Senator, Minority Leader of the United States Senate, Mitch McConnell. And this is from shortly after his first term in office as United States Senator, recognizing Clyde for his service to the people of Northern Kentucky. What's happening in Kenton County at the time in the 1980s while Clyde's serving in the Senate is the Republicans are trying to make inroads in local races. They had not been very successful in the 60s and 70s of that. And in the 1980s, they ran a group called for the fiscal court. They tried to take over the fiscal court, and they ran 3 gentlemen, Gordon Wade, Ron Turner, and the guy at the top there, a guy named Ralph Dries. And of course, this week is very special, very meaningful to us because we just lost Ralph this past week. And our condolences go out to his family. Continue to see the outpouring of love and support for Ralph. Ralph was just a jewel of a guy, but he ran for the fiscal court. Before he was judge executive. People know him as judge executive because he came judge executive in the 2000s. But before that, he ran a very credible race in 1980s at that time. And then the Republicans ran. Well, let me ask you this. This is going to be our quiz question for the night. What year did Dries, Turner, and Wade run for the Kenton County Fiscal Court? What year did that occur? And I gave you a hint. I already gave you the decade, so you just got to pick one of the 10 years of that decade, right? So that 1985, Republicans mounted a challenge for the fiscal court again, ran a candidate named Gene Daniels, who's from Southern Kenton County for judge executive. Gene ran a respectable race, but lost that race. And then a few years later, there was an opening on the fiscal court. Dick Combs became the candidate, first Republican elected the fiscal court in some time. But the judge executive race had eluded the Republicans. And then, so Clyde was recently off his defeat in 1986. 1988, a poll was commissioned with the help of Jim Bunning's congressional office. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of Jim Bunning and his congressional office to the establishment of the Republican Party in Kenton County in Northern Kentucky. But Jim helped commission and help run this volunteer poll that showed that Clyde could win the race against then Bob Aldermeyer, who was the Democrat judge executive. And so Clyde would announce that he was going to run for that race against Bob Aldermeyer. and he won the race. This is one of the campaign brochures. I could do a whole another hour session on that race and all the different aspects of that. But the long and short of it is he won that race. And this is the Kentucky Post. It's a GOP judge. And in his hand, Clyde's holding a toolkit, because Altemeyer's theme during that campaign was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so he was there to fix it. So he became the first Republican in probably 100 years to be elected judge executive. And would go on to win another term in 1993 against Denny Bowman, or in 1993 against Denny Bowman for judge executive again. And then he was getting ready to gear up for 1998. And, you kind of hesitate to talk about bad things, but this is history. And you know what? Bad things happen to good people, and bad things happen because of things. And one of those was that in 1998, as he was getting ready to run, there was an issue that surrounded the bidding of a new Kenton County courthouse and parking garage that Clyde was in charge of. And the Democrat Attorney General, Ben Chandler, ended up filing criminal charges against Clyde for his role in that. There's all kinds of different sides to that story. Once again, that's another whole hour presentation that we can go into. But the long and short of it is Clyde decided that he was going to resign from office and do that. But really, it was a blessing in disguise for us as a family. And the reason was because at that time he was diagnosed with congestive heart failure and was really given a short time to live. I think they said 2 years if he didn't. Reduce stress was one of the big things. And so obviously resigning in that stressful situation, the job was going to be stressful regardless of what was going on. But with all that, it probably saved his life. And, Clyde died a few years back in 2019. So he ended up having 21 more years, even though he was given 2 years to live. And so it really saved his life. But, this ended a long career of public service to Northern Kentucky. But you know what? He wasn't going to stop serving. Clyde found time to volunteer. In fact, he went down to the parish kitchen. Somebody there said, "Hey, are you doing this as part of your service because of your criminal conviction?" He's like, no, I'm doing it because I want to serve the people. He would go down there. Now, towards the later years, he would go down and just eat the cookies. But he was serving the parish kitchen. Both he and Mary drove cancer patients to their cancer treatments. In fact, the Cancer Society gave them an award a number of years after that for their involvement in that. And of course, Mary was involved in a number of social organizations that were enough to keep Clyde's calendar totally filled for a long time. This is a letter from Monsignor John Murphy, who was president of Thomas More College. He had sent Clyde an elephant, and he said the elephant was made in India. And he said, "I'd like for you to have it, not as a suggestion that all Republicans should be in India, although you may assume that if you wish. Should you do so, please make an exception for yourself, as you are my #1 Republican and could almost make me change my party affiliation." And why is this significant? Well, this is significant because this goes to show why Clyde was able to win so many of those races, because this is a Democrat Catholic who was a supporter of the Lutheran Republican Clyde Middleton. And it's because of Clyde's personality and really Mary's personality that helped win these people over. He goes on to thank him for his involvement with Thomas More College and says, "I have regarded it as a privilege to know you and Mary, not only because you're such nice people, but because you stand for so many of the things I regard as important: active political involvement, concern about the church, and concern about family." What a better tribute. It's just such a nice letter. And the other thing, that the church thing, they were very active in their church, Faith Lutheran and then Gloria Dei Lutheran. But my mother particularly was very involved in the ecumenical movement. So she was involved with the Church Women United groups, and then also Interfaith Commission, where she was involved. So, she worked together. She continued to work with a number of organizations there, and there was a number of organizations that have the African Americans that were involved. So she continued to involve people of all different creeds, colors, races, and that. And she just simply loved people. And what a nicer thing than that. One of her favorite organizations was the Salvation Army, where she was in charge of getting people to ring the bell for the Salvation Army kettle, and she loved doing that. She would get people involved in that. Tragically, Mary was killed on November 22nd, 2011, when a garbage truck backed over in front of her Fort Mitchell home. The immediate outpouring of love and support for Clyde and the family showed the depth and breadth of love that the community had for Mary. Her funeral was one of the largest in the community at the time. I think people waited 3 hours to go through the visitation line, and the church was packed full to the capacity. One of the first events that I went to after her death was an event at Fort Mitchell Country Club, and it was a Christmas party. And I was at that party, and I started looking around. I started thinking, oh, who do I know here? I'm going to look around. Is that moment I realized, my mother would not be looking for the people that she knew. She would be looking for the people that she did not know. And she would go and meet them and engage them in conversation, and she would listen. And she would listen to what they had to say and what their interests were. And what she was doing was she was going in her mind, she was going through that Rolodex in her mind and saying, what group am I going to get this person involved in? And so she would do that. And she was great at organizing. One of the church council meetings after her death, they asked how many people are here because of Mary Middleton, and nearly every hand in the room went up. So that just shows what, her impact that she had. They received a number of awards posthumously, including the very famed Two-Headed Calf Award given by Behringer-Crawford Museum, and the DeVue Cup given by the Greater Cincinnati Foundation. Here are just a few of the organizations that they were involved in. And as you can see, Mary has a much bigger list than Clyde did, because Mary was so involved. They were able to meet a number of national figures. This is actually a snapshot photo with Vice President Dan Quayle. I love the expression on Dad's face there. And then, of course, President, I think at that time, Vice President George H.W. Bush. This is Mary. Mary wrote a number of things, but this is, I called the genius of Mary Middleton. She was very frugal. Okay, she was frugal with her money. Even though she was known as really an impeccable dresser, she would go to Miss Martha's and see what the fashion was, and then go to Value City and purchase it. But she was also very frugal with her time. She would spend time at meetings and stuff making notes while other people were talking. And this was just one of the ways. This is the back of an envelope where she wrote a letter to the Kentucky Post thanking them for an article that they had done. But she would not waste any time in that. And so that's one of her greatest attributes, I think. So the week of her death, my brother David told me he'd done a video of her, made a copy for my sister Ann and I to watch, and so we put it in. Great video. I could go into the details about that, but I'm running out of time. And so what occurred during the video is, you first see the video of her live, and you're just like, oh my gosh, there she is. And Dave just did a fabulous job of asking the questions to her about her life. And there were so many things, so many stories that came out of that. But one of the things that he asked was, at your funeral, at your wake, what would you want said? And we're like, oh my gosh. And there's a pause there, and Ann and I are just, like, oh, what a question. This is less than a year before her death, and he has no idea that she's going to be killed in this tragic accident. And he asked her that question, and it's just one of the most touching things to us, that she would, they asked her that question, and she looked at the camera and she said, "Do good for others. Do good for others." And then the camera went black, and I was like, is that not what life is about, right? And if that is not what the life of Mary and Clyde Middleton were about, was doing good for others. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I'll take any questions that we have, and I believe that I can, this is the photo of them, but I believe I can also reveal the answer to the question. And I would like to thank one Shane Gnome for helping me get the answer to the tonight's trivia question, because I wasn't sure the exact year of the Dries, Turner, and Wade election, and that answer was 1981. So hopefully we had somebody that guessed correctly out of one of those 10.
We did actually have a couple of correct answers, and I'm just looking through. So on Facebook, Will Turwart guessed 1981. So congrats to Will, frequent viewer of Northern Kentucky History Hour and frequent contributor in the chat. So, and then on Zoom, Lori Risch, actually not eligible for a pin, but and Behringer-Crawford museum director, in case you didn't know. Lori, thank you so much for participating in the quiz. Lori got it right, as did, I'm pretty sure, yes, Carl Coucher. So congrats to Carl. And we will get you, so if you win, if you guys didn't know, I didn't do my plug at the beginning, but we have these really cool, let's see, these really cool pins that say Northern Kentucky History Hour. Obviously bragging rights, right, as well. So congrats to Will and Carl, and we will make sure that you guys get your pin. So thank you for playing our quiz. I'm just going to write down really quickly who won, and I'm also going to text my co-founder of History Hour, because we are going to start getting asked what is next week, and I need him to help me with that. So let me see here. We had a number of questions, John. Really great job, and such a touching, amazing story about your parents. I mean, it's so fascinating the way you did such a nice job putting their story together and weaving in so many landmark moments about Northern Kentucky history. One of the questions from one of the viewers was, when do we know when the library was actually founded?
Just looking at that question, I see some people on here that might be able to answer that, because I don't know. I was young when it happened. So
I found this really interesting article. I was trying to answer some of the questions, as they came up in the chat. And so I found this really great history on the Kenton County Library website about it. And it has a really long and interesting history, but it looks like on March 22nd, 1953, there was a bookmobile service started. And then it says, I was talking about funding, and it doesn't really say on the history of exactly, like, it talks about the tax rate, sort of being obtained because of signatures, etc., but it doesn't actually say on the website. So I don't know if okay, people are commenting. Let's see. Nope, no one says. Okay, it's a mystery. If we find out, we'll post it on the chat on Facebook. So let's see. Oh, someone's joining us. But as far as questions, let's see, there were several comments in the chat. Let me see. Very nice comment from Gretchen Bartley. And let me see here. Yeah, John, you're going to need to read all these awesome comments. I totally agree. I think we don't really have any other questions. There were a couple in the chat, actually, John, now that I am going to say, you had mentioned that your dad was the state GOP chair. And I think what you had said was there was something like he was the only maybe senator to serve in that role or something. I'm sorry, I kind of like
Northern
now
Kentucky,
I'm trying to remember.
at least since then. I don't know if there was anyone before him. That's why you need Will Turwart.
Yeah. Well, he had asked if Damon Thayer had served in that role, and I tried to dig into our local knowledge here in this house, and we don't
believe
think
Damon was 4th congressional district chair.
There we go. So anyway, well, I think that is our last outstanding question, other than all of the very, very kind, and I completely agree, all of the very nice comments in the chat. So
I
we're
see a lot of
tiny bit-
familiar faces. I really appreciate everybody being on from many different states, just like Mary and Clyde, probably maybe some foreign countries too, but
We love it. We love it. And this has been, just like I said, such a wonderful presentation, and really, really appreciate you putting it all together for us. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Especially all the references to the past history hours. Did want to let everybody know, if you missed any of those, you can watch on Behringer-Crawford's Facebook page or on our YouTube channel. So if you wanted to go back and hear about Sanfordville, you could do that. So on YouTube. I did want to let everybody know that next week we are going to be talking about the Dinsmore House and some really interesting history in Boone County. So we're going to take a trip over to Boone County next week with oh gosh, Kathy Colopy. I hope I did not mess up Kathy's name. If Kathy's on here, I apologize. But so nice to see everyone. Again, John, gosh, thank you so much. And everybody else, and John as well. We will see you next week. So thanks, everybody. Good
bye-bye.
night.
Thank you.
Bye.